Hey everybody! So moving right along in our series this year of quick holiday projects for people that when you kind of forgot to make them something. Today we're going to make a picture frame. This is a little bit more complicated, but a really nice project when it's done. So we're going to get right into it. The only thing that you're going to need, I went down to the hardware store, I got a thin brass piece of brass. This is 1 inch wide and 6 inches long, and I just rounded over these corners and drilled a hole for a rivet. We're going to do a little bit of bending, but we need to wrap this whole thing in leather first. So let's get into the whole project. So the first thing you're going to need to do is make yourself a little pattern. It's super simple. Take the size photo you want. So in my instance, I decided a 4x6 photo would be great. Shrink that down by 1/2 inch, so when you slide the photo in, it's not, it's being held. So this opening is 3.5 by 5.5. Then you want to add 2 inches to both of those measurements, so you have a 1 inch border around the whole thing. So this is 7.5 by 5.5 on the outside, okay? So to reiterate, make your opening on the inside a 1/2 inch smaller than the photo you want it to house, and make your outside measurement 2 inches bigger, so that you have 1 inch all around. Pretty simple. So I have 2 thicknesses of leather here. I have, this is about 9 ounces. This is going to be the front with our window to show our photo. And then for the back, I'm using a thinner 4-ounce leather because we're going to use 2 pieces and sandwich some of Weaver's pattern plastic in between to make it nice and rigid. The good thing is, though, you only need 1 pattern because all we can do is we can trace this out for the front where we need our window, but then on the back all we have to do is trace out the outside square. We won't trace the inside square. So it's just 1 simple piece, super easy pattern to make without a computer, just 2 squares. So to cut out this inside square, I'm just going to take my rotary punch on its smallest hole and just punch little holes right in the corners here. And all that's going to do is give me a nice meeting point for my 2 cut lines so that I'm not cutting past the line. And now we'll basically just connect all these holes and we'll have our frame cut out. So we only cut out 1 copy of the back of our piece, and that's because we're going to glue in some pattern plastic and then glue this to the other chunk and just trim everything out. We want our pattern plastic to be a little bit smaller than our actual back, so what I'm going to do is we have a right angle cut in our pattern plastic here. This is only specific to this pattern, but I'm going to line up this corner with an inside corner and let it hang out. So we're going to be, and essentially this is a way to quickly cut out a piece of plastic that's 1 inch smaller than our back piece, and that'll give us just a 1/2 inch leeway on either side because we don't want to be punching through and stitching this. Not great for the tools. So it doesn't need to be perfect. It's thin enough where you're never ever going to see it or an outline of it or anything like that. And be careful when you're cutting this stuff too. It's easy to slip a blade. There we go. This is our back. This is our pattern plastic. To make sure that this is like remotely centered, it doesn't need to be crazy. I just set my dividers at a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to go around. I already did this once, but I usually do it twice when I'm on the back of the leather because it's kind of difficult to like get a visible line. But you don't want to press so hard that you're leaving. This will be covered by this, but on the outside we don't want this line visible, so just don't press too hard. And now we just got to slap a little bit of glue on here, and we'll glue in our pattern plastic. And with the pattern plastic, when you're gluing it in like this, I just treat it pretty much like normal leather or anything else you would be laminating together with contact adhesive. We're just going to apply glue to both things and let it dry to the touch, and then press it, stick it together. While the glue's drying, we're going to wrap our brass, I can't even talk.
Red leather, yellow leather, red
Yeah, right.
leather, yellow leather.
While the glue's drying, we're going to wrap our brass bar in leather, and this is going to become the stand for our picture frame. It's going to kind of go like this. We're going to I put some lines here. This is going to bend down to be the kind of foot, and this is going to bend up this little section here and be riveted onto our back. But we want to wrap everything before we do any bending. Kind of like that video we made doing the bracelet. Now what I'm going to do is I want some leather, some extra leather. So our bar is 1 inch wide. I'm going to cut this strip 1.5 inches wide. And our bar is 6 inches long. I'm going to cut this strip 7 inches long so that when we flip this over, you can see we have some room. And that is twofold. The first reason we're doing this is because when we bend it, that leather, it's almost like making a bifold. It's the reason that the outside needs to be longer than the inside. When we bend it, this leather is going to, the bar is going to spread out deeper into the leather. The other reason is we don't want to glue the bar at all. So this gives us some room around to glue our leather without gluing the bar. And we don't want to glue the bar because when we bend it, it's going to need to move. That's basically it. I want these ends to be rounded though, so I'm just going to take an 1.5 inch strap-in punch and round them over a little bit. There we go. And then you can still see when we put our bar in there, we're going to have plenty of room. I'm not going to do this one yet though. We'll get that glued up and then we'll just punch everything else, trim it out nice and flush after. Alright, so once this is dry to the touch pretty much, we're just going to pop that in there. And the only thing that this is really going to do is just give us a little bit of rigidity. And then I'm going to use my roller here. There we go, that's good enough. And now we just need to glue this to another piece. So our glue's dried to the touch, and what we're going to do is we're going to just place this in the middle. Now, middle-ish, right? So this side is going to be riveted onto the back. So I want this a little bit higher up. So I'm going to place it right about there. And again, this doesn't need to be perfect. You know, it's going to work even if it's a little off. We're going to put that there. And then lining this up is going to be a little bit tricky, but not too bad. There we go. You want to make sure that I'm not going to use a hammer because I don't want to dent that brass. It's not very thick. You don't want to use super thick brass. Like usually most hardware stores will have, it's not paper thin, I don't know the gauge of it, but you can bend it with your hands, so that's kind of the thickness of brass that you want. This isn't going to be taking much force or anything. There we go. And now we can just trim this up, and you can do this with the punch or the blade. I'm just going to use my blade really quickly because when you use a blade, you can kind of just take off these little tiny corners that don't leave it perfectly round, and then once we sand that down everything, there won't be any little corner there. And now this piece is ready to just stitch up. And this is all dry, so we just need to stick this to this, and we're getting ready to... We're almost at the point where we got a lot of sewing to do. We have our back piece is pretty much ready to go. The only thing we're going to have to do is sew down one side, but we're going to go through the whole order of stitching after we get everything prepared to stitch. The last piece we need to prepare is our front frame. And the only thing I'm really going to do here is I'm just going to bevel, sand, and burnish this inside a little bit. That's really all this needs. So now we have to mark all of our stitch lines and do our selective stitching before we put everything together. The first thing is our stand part here. We're just going to sew all the way around that. So I'm going to make a nice little stitch line and then we'll punch it and stitch it. We're not going to sew this onto our picture frame, we're going to rivet it. The next thing is our back piece. Now to visualize, this is essentially how this is going to work, right? Except there are going to be bends in this piece. So it's going to go like that. Our photo is going to slide in on this side. So that means we have to stitch and burnish this seam and this seam before we put everything together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all of my exterior stitch lines, and I'm just going to make note that I have to sew one side separately first. This side is the same thing, except we're not going to mark all of our stitch lines. We're just going to mark that one, because this stitch line, we're going to punch through, like this is all going to get glued and punched through. So we only need to mark that one. If you want, you can do something like that so that you know where to stop this stitch line, but that's really all you need. Next thing is personal preference. I am going to add a stitch line to the inside. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. I did not line this piece. Reason being, before you could, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but before you could easily go and just kind of have any picture printed out or print out a picture at home, we used to make leather picture frames unlined on one side because you could only really order them in specific sizes. So what this does is, it's not super smooth, so it grabs onto the print and will just hold it in place. You can also add a plastic or glass. I mean, I don't think you can add glass. You can't sew glass in the leather.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You can add plastic if you want. I don't. I think it's just going to be in a home. It'll look nicer without it. So now basically we're just going to punch everything and do a bunch of sewing. And you guys have seen that a million times. We'll put in some B-roll, but we'll come back when it's time to put all of this together. So we kind of just went on a stitching binge here. You guys have seen us stitch a whole bunch. So I got this whole support stand sewn up and burnished. I got one side of each of these sewn up and burnished because remember, we're going to stitch the other three sides and you slide your picture in here. And then I just stitched around our frame itself. The next step before we glue this to sew everything up, is we're going to rivet our stand onto the back of our picture frame. And before we do that, we need to make some bends in this. So remember, we have the copper going, or the brass plate going through here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the line on my cutting board. Where the hole is where we're going to rivet. I'm going to put my thumb about 1.5 inches in. Remember, this is very thin brass, and this is why I'm using thin brass, so that we can bend it with our hands. So that gets us this mounting point here. Now, if you want, you can do, I did a 6-inch brass rod, so this is 7 inches. You can do this a little bit shorter, and this can be how you mount it. You don't have to bend this side. But what I want to do is I'm going to do 2 inches on this side and make another bend. And what that's going to allow me to do is, let's get the light there. So you see how we're getting more stable now? And then I can kind of, and you can do this later when your piece is all put together and stuff. You can adjust the angle at which the picture frame is sitting, you know, once everything's done. The only thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to rivet this on first. Because if we were to rivet this here, it would be really hard to like sew around everything. And our rivet's going to land in the middle, so it'll be hidden by the picture that you put in it. So we can just go ahead and glue this all together, and then we will just rivet through here once this is all stitched up. So once we have everything sewn up, I hammered down all the stitching. And remember too, this is very plain. So if you want to tool this, you want to decorate it, this is a great project to get super creative. But I'm just going to give this a quick edge and burnish. And then we're pretty much ready to attach our little stand and we'll be all done. So we're all sewn up, and what I've done is I've made a mark here, and that mark corresponds to where I want my rivet to be. And this is why I wait till the end for this, right? Because now, let me make sure you can see this, we can set this up as long as we're centered. We can set it up and get the perfect tilt and get the perfect location, whatever you want to do. I just want a pretty standard looking photo frame, and I think that'll do nicely. So all I'm going to do, I made a mark right there, and I'm going to go in and I'm just going to use my punch, and we're going to punch right through that pattern plastic. It's nice and easy to punch through, won't hurt your tools. One rivet on the little wonder, and we're ready to go. And here we go. So there we go. We have a nice leather picture frame. Stands up nicely. I love the thickness of the strap. It gives like a real nice design element. And that's it. So very simple project, but it looks really, really nice. You can also decorate it. You can emboss things. You can do whatever you want. Print out a nice picture any size you want. Another quick, efficient, really nice holiday gift if you need an idea. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.